The badge printer made a small tearing sound, like a sticker being peeled off a windshield. I heard it before I saw it. 300 people were packed into the atrium of Sterling Aerospace for the company's 40th anniversary gala. A string quartet was doing something polite to a Beatles song. Waiters moved through the crowd with scallops balanced on ceramic spoons. And underneath all of it, near the reception table, that one small plastic tear. My stepfather peeled the badge off the roll and turned around with it pinched between 2 fingers. "Staff, he didn't hand it to me, you hand things to guests." Retired Major General Robert Sterling reached across the 18 inches between us and clipped it to the neckline of my dress, the way a man tags a suitcase before he sends it down a belt, and then he pressed it flat with his thumb. "There," he said. "Now everyone knows where to put you." Behind him, a congressman's chief of staff laughed into her champagne. She thought it was a joke. That's the thing about my stepfather. He always said it in a voice that let other people decide it was a joke, so that if you flinched, you were the one who'd ruined the evening. I looked down at the badge. The adhesive had caught a thread of the fabric and puckered it. "Robert," my mother said from somewhere near his elbow. "The seating. There is no seating," he said pleasantly. "That's my point. We're at capacity for the program, Diane. Victoria understands. She's logistics." He turned to me and put a hand on my shoulder, and he squeezed once, the way a man squeezes a fence post to check that it will hold. "Go help the catering lead keep the flow moving by the kitchen doors. You're good at that. Nobody moves product like my daughter." He said my daughter the way you'd say my lawn guy, and half the people in earshot heard warmth in it. So I walked to the alcove by the kitchen doors, where the air conditioning came out cold and the swinging doors kept slapping the back of my arm. And for 2 hours and 10 minutes I stood under a speaker, playing a cello arrangement of Blackbird, and made sure the ice buckets stayed full. In my clutch, next to a tube of lipstick I'd bought at a drugstore on the way, there was a matte black rectangle about the size of a car key fob, riding on a keyring with a chipped enamel Air Force emblem that had belonged to my father. It had no logo on it, no serial number on the outside. It looked like something you'd use to unlock a rental car. At 9:41 that night, it buzzed twice against the lining, which is a thing it is not supposed to do at a party, and I stood there holding a bucket of ice, and I could not tell a single person in that room what it meant. 4 days later, in this same atrium, every screen in the building would go black in the middle of a $10 billion signing ceremony, in front of 4 general officers and a deputy undersecretary of defense. My stepfather would stand at that podium sweating through a $2,000 suit. And he would put a microphone in my hand himself. He would beg me, in front of everyone, to fix it. But that night, I refilled the ice. If you've ever been the one they seat by the kitchen doors, do me a favor and hit that like button right now, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I want to know how many of us there are, because I need you to understand something before we go any further. My stepfather wasn't wrong that I worked in logistics. He was just wrong about which building. My father was Master Sergeant Daniel Vance, and he was a crew chief, which meant he was the man who signed the form that said an aircraft was safe to fly. He died in 1994, when I was 7, in a hangar fire at a base in Oklahoma that made the local news for one evening, and then didn't. My mother married Robert Sterling 22 months later. He was a full colonel then, on his way up, with a jaw like a bridge abutment, and a way of walking into a room that made other people's posture correct itself. He had a house with a circular driveway. He had a study with a wall of framed things. And in the middle of that wall, in a dark frame, was the citation for the Airman's Medal he'd received for pulling 2 men out of a burning aircraft in Oklahoma in 1994. I was 7. Nobody explained the overlap to me, and I did not have the vocabulary to ask. I do remember one thing. I remember standing in that study in a corduroy dress, reading that citation slowly, the way you read when you're new at it, and getting to a line that said the aircraft commander returned to the fuselage a second time. And I remember going into the kitchen and asking my mother whether Daddy went in twice or once. She was rinsing a colander. She didn't turn around. "Don't ask him about Oklahoma," she said. "It upsets him." That was the first lesson in the house. There was a version of things, and the version was load-bearing, and you did not put your weight anywhere else. The second lesson came when I was 9 and Kevin was 4. Kevin was Robert's son, born to Robert's first wife, and after the custody arrangement settled, he lived with us full-time, and he had the second bedroom upstairs, which had a window seat. I had the room over the garage. I want to be accurate about this, because when I've told this part before, people picture something out of a Dickens novel. It wasn't a hovel. It was a finished bonus room with carpet and a space heater and a door that locked from the outside for reasons nobody ever explained to me. In January, the floor was cold enough that I slept in socks. In July, it was 104 degrees up there by 3 in the afternoon. The stairwell smelled like motor oil and lawn fertilizer. And for 11 years, when I told people where I lived, I said upstairs. 22 years after that, a federal investigator would ask me to describe that room for the record, and I would find that I could still name the exact spot on the floor where the heater cord ran, and that I still could not make my mouth say the word bedroom. The third lesson was the one that shaped everything. I was 17. I'd been running the timing myself for a year, up at 4:40, 3 miles on the shoulder of Route 9 in the dark, and I'd gotten a nomination interview scheduled for the Air Force Academy. I put the letter on the kitchen island the way you'd put down a winning hand. Robert read it standing up, with his reading glasses pushed down. He read it twice, and then he set it on the counter and squared the edges against the granite until it was perfectly parallel with the edge of the stone. "No," he said. "Sir, I've already got the—" "I know what you've got." He took the glasses off. "Victoria, I have spent 30 years around this. Women aren't built for war. That isn't cruelty, it's engineering. And you're not just a woman. You're a woman with no service in her." He tapped the letter twice. "You have a serviceable mind and no spine to hang it on. You'd wash, and when you washed, it would be my name on the roster." Then he took his glasses back out of his pocket, put them on, picked the letter up, folded it in half, and put it in his jacket pocket. Not the trash, his pocket. He carried my future around in his suit for the rest of the afternoon, and then, presumably, at some point, he threw it away somewhere I wouldn't find it. My mother stood in the doorway to the pantry with a bag of rice in her hand and looked at the floor between us like it was a body of water she couldn't swim. Here's the part I own. I didn't fight. Not that day, not for a long time after. I've had 22 years to think about why, and the honest answer isn't noble. It wasn't strategy. I believed, with my whole 17-year-old chest, that if I just got good enough, the getting good enough would do the arguing for me. That competence announces itself. That one day the work would be so undeniable that he would have to look up. That belief cost me 2 decades. I want to be clear about that, because I've watched a lot of people online tell this kind of story, like patience is a virtue. Sometimes patience is just fear wearing a nicer coat. I enlisted 11 days after my 18th birthday, under my father's name, which my mother had let me keep, because Robert didn't want it. Vance. I did 4 years enlisted in communications, got picked up for a commissioning program, and spent the next stretch of my career doing the least glamorous work in the United States Air Force: cryptographic key management. Certificates, hardware security modules, the plumbing. Nobody makes a movie about the plumbing, but every aircraft that takes off with a software load, every satellite that accepts a command, every missile warning feed that a duty officer believes all of it rests on one question. Is this code signed by someone we trust? And can we prove the signature wasn't forged? That question has an answer, And the answer is a chain of certificates, and at the top of the chain, there is a root. And a very small number of people are allowed to sit at that root and decide what gets signed. By the time I was 36, I had left active duty and come back as a civilian technical director for a special programs office under United States Cyber Command, with a reserve commission I still drilled on, still a captain. Because the reserve promotion system does not care how many people report to you on a Tuesday. My program handled the string that appears on the documents I sign, because my name doesn't appear on them, was Ghost Matrix. My family knew exactly one sentence about my job, and it was the sentence I gave them, and it was true, and it was designed to end conversations. I'm a captain in the reserves. I do supply readiness. They never ask the second question, not once in 11 years. That's not a secret I kept. That's a door nobody knocked on. 11 weeks before the gala on a Tuesday afternoon in a windowless room in Maryland, I was doing the most boring thing I do. Cross-domain vendor attestation review. Which means, a contractor submits a build, and my office verifies that the thing they submitted is actually the thing they claim. All the way down, before the government's root of trust puts its signature on it and lets it fly. The program was called Ironweave, $10 billion over 8 years, sole source, for the cryptographic backbone of the next-generation space-to-ground command network. The prime contractor was Sterling Aerospace. I want to be very precise here, because it matters legally and it matters to the story. I did not put myself on that program. I filed the conflict disclosure the second the vendor list crossed my desk, the way I do every year on Form 4453. Item 14. Familial relationships, and my office walled me off from the source selection. I never touched the award decision. What I retained was the technical function, because there were 4 people in the federal government cleared to do it, and I was one of them. Remember item 14. We'll come back to it, and it will not mean what you think it means. So, Tuesday afternoon, I'm 300 pages into a build manifest, drinking coffee that had gone cold enough to have a skin on it, scrolling through the attestation report on the Ironweave key derivation module. And I stopped scrolling. There's a thing you do when you write cryptographic libraries for the government. You leave a seam, not a backdoor, the opposite, a fingerprint. A structural choice so specific and so arbitrary that no 2 engineers would ever make it independently. In my libraries, the seam was in the ordering of the cipher suite negotiation table. Everyone in the world orders that table by strength. I ordered mine by the year each algorithm was standardized. And then I reversed it. And then, in the parameter block, I set the lattice dimension seed to a number that has no cryptographic meaning at all. 4/11/94, the 11th of April, 1994. The night the hangar burned, I wrote that library in 2015 on a government contract for a program that was canceled in 2017 and archived. It has never been commercially licensed to anyone. It cannot be, because the government owns it. I was looking at it on page 192 of a Sterling Aerospace submission. The reverse table, the lattice seed, my father's death, sitting in a $10 billion bid, presented to the United States Air Force as the original work of Sterling Aerospace's chief technology officer. My half-brother, Kevin Sterling, is 34. He is charming in a way I have never been able to fake and have stopped resenting. He can walk into a room of skeptical colonels and have them laughing in 90 seconds. He got a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from a good school with a lot of tutoring, and he has never in his life written a line of production code. And 3 years ago, Robert made him Chief Technology Officer of Sterling Aerospace. And the press release used the phrase next generation leadership. I sat in that room for a long time with my hand flat on the desk. And I want to tell you that what I felt was rage. It wasn't. It was something much worse and much quieter, which was recognition. Because the second I saw it, A piece of my own life clicked into a slot, and I understood something I had never understood in 22 years. I finally knew why Robert Sterling had spent 2 decades keeping me at arm's length from that company. Why I'd never been offered a summer internship, an interview, a tour of the floor. Why, when I made technical director, he told my mother it was a civilian desk job and changed the subject. It was never about my last name. It was never even about being a woman. It was that if I ever got close enough to look at their code, I would recognize it. He hadn't been ashamed of me. He'd been hiding from me. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't call him. I didn't post anything. I didn't walk into my director's office and say my family is stealing from the Air Force because a woman who says that sentence out loud with no paper behind it is a woman with a grievance. And a grievance is the easiest thing in the world to file away. Stolen code by itself is a contract dispute. Lawyers argue about it for 6 years and somebody pays a settlement and nothing changes and nobody goes anywhere near a courtroom. I needed to know something else. I needed to know what they'd done about the part they couldn't steal. Because here's the thing about my library, the code is only half of it. The other half is key generation, the actual manufacture of the cryptographic material that lives inside the hardware, which has to happen inside an accredited facility, under 2-person control on U.S. soil, with a documented chain of custody from the Silicon forward. That's not a nice to have, that is the whole reason the system means anything. Kevin could copy my code off an archived repository his father had access to. He could not copy a key ceremony, so he had to have run one. And if he'd run one, there'd be a package, facility accreditation, custody logs, serial ranges, witness signatures. I pulled the package. It was beautiful. It was 41 pages. It was signed. It had a facility number. It had a 2-person control roster. And it had the electronic signature of Robert Sterling, Executive Chairman, attesting to all of it. It also had a hardware serial range that did not match the manifest on the modules. Sterling had actually shipped to the government for testing. Not by much, 62 units in a block of 4,000. 62. That's the kind of discrepancy that gets explained away as a clerical error by a program manager who wants to go home. I have watched it happen. It very nearly happened here, because on the same page, in the corner, in 6-point type, there was a ticket reference. Someone inside Sterling Aerospace had already caught this. Ticket 4417, status closed. Resolution, no defect found. Reporter no longer with company. I looked at that line for about 10 seconds. Then I went and found the reporter. Marisol Reyes worked nights at a colocation facility off the interstate, walking rows of server cabinets with a tablet, replacing failed drives. 29 years old, a master's in applied cryptography, and a badge that let her touch other people's hardware and nothing else. I met her at 5:40 in the morning at a diner with a laminated menu, at the end of her shift, because that was the only time she'd agree to, and she made me come to her. She had her hood up. She didn't take it down the whole time. "I know who you are," she said before I sat down. "You're a Sterling. I'm a Vance. That's a distinction that matters to you." She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "Whatever this is, I signed a separation agreement. $22,000. It's not a lot of money. It's exactly enough money that I can't afford to have not taken it. I'm not asking you to break it. Everyone starts there." I put a printout on the table, face down, and left my hand on it. "Tell me about ticket 4417. She went very still, in the specific way people go still, when the thing they've been carrying alone gets said out loud by a stranger. "They told me I misread a manifest," she said. "You didn't." I know I didn't. Her jaw moved. I ran it 4 times. 62 modules in that build have serials from a lot that was never in our accreditation. They came from somewhere else. And when I asked where, My director took me to a conference room and told me I was creating exposure, and 40 minutes later my badge stopped working. And a guy from HR walked me to my car holding my jacket like it was a dead bird. She finally looked up. I have a mother with stage 3 renal disease. I took the 22,000. So if you're here to tell me I should have been braver, I want you to know I've already had that conversation with myself about 400 times. I'm here because you were right, I said, and because you're the only person on earth who can tell me where those 62 came from. She was quiet. Guangzhou, she said, through a broker in Rotterdam. The invoice routed through a subsidiary that got spun up 9 months before the bid and had 1 employee. She pushed her coffee an inch away. They didn't run a key ceremony. They didn't have the facility. They bought pre-provisioned modules from a broker and dropped them into a bid for the crypto backbone of the American Command Network. And then they wrote a 41-page ceremony package for a ceremony that never happened. The waitress came by and filled our cups and left. You understand what I'm going to have to ask you to do, I said. Yeah, she laughed, and there was nothing in it. You're going to ask me to sign something. An affidavit to the Inspector General and the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. And I'm going to be honest with you about what happens next, because nobody was honest with me at your age. I turned the printout over. It will take between 1 and 2 years. You'll be deposed. Their lawyers will go through your text messages, and your credit report and your mother's medical bills, and they will build a story where you're a disgruntled employee with a grudge. There is a real chance you don't work in this industry again. Great sales pitch. And there's a whistleblower provision, and my office can support a reinstatement claim, and if this goes the way I think it goes, the company that blacklisted you is going to need someone who can prove she caught it first. Marisol Reyes sat in a diner booth at 6 a.m. with her hood up and her mother's dialysis schedule in her phone, and she thought about it for a full minute, which is a very long time, and I did not fill the silence. 62 modules, she said. Do you know what those are for? Yes, say it. I want to hear somebody official say it. Missile warning and space-to-ground command authentication. She pulled her hood down. Where do I sign? I want you to notice something, because it's the part these systems usually skip. I didn't beat them with a secret. I beat them with paperwork, and it took 11 weeks, and most of it was extremely boring. The referral package went to the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General and to the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency on a Thursday. 406 pages. Marisol's affidavit. The serial mismatch. The archived repository access logs, showing that the 2015 library had been pulled from a government archive in March of 2022 by an account credentialed to Sterling Aerospace's executive chairman. And one more thing that I found on week 9, which changed the shape of everything. The account credentialed to Robert Sterling had pulled that archive at 11:51 at night from an IP block assigned to a hotel in Aspen, Colorado. Robert Sterling was in Ramstein, Germany that week. It's a matter of public record. He gave a keynote. There are photographs. Kevin was in Aspen. He posted about the snow. So the signature on the key ceremony package, the one attesting that everything was clean, the one that made this a federal felony instead of a business dispute, it wasn't the general's. It was his son's, wearing his father's credentials. And I sat there at 11 at night, alone, with my hand over my mouth, and I understood the whole architecture of my family at once. Robert Sterling had not built an empire and handed it to a fraud. Robert Sterling had built an empire around a boy who could not do the job, and had spent 20 years constructing a world in which nobody was allowed to look too closely at Kevin, including Robert. And the person he'd needed to keep the furthest away, the one set of eyes that would recognize the theft on sight, had been sleeping over his garage. He didn't hate me because I was nothing. He kept me small because I was the only person in his life who could read. There was one more decision to make, and it was the one that cost me sleep. Iron Weave's provisional attestation certificate was up for its annual renewal in 19 days. Renewal isn't automatic. It requires a signature from the attestation authority. Mine. I didn't have to attack anybody. I didn't have to break into anything. There is no room in the Pentagon where you can pull a lever and make a company's screens go dark. All I had to do was decline to renew. I put my recommendation to suspend in writing, routed it through my chain, and made it clear in a memorandum that I was a related party, that my recusal from source selection was on file, and that I would defer to a senior official's review of the technical finding. 2 weeks later, the review came back. The finding was sustained. The certificate would lapse. They gave me the date. It was the 15th. The 15th was a Monday, and at that point, the Iron Weave award signing ceremony was scheduled for the 6th of the following month. 3 weeks of daylight between the lapse and the ceremony. Sterling would find out quietly, in a conference room, from a contracting officer. There'd be a scramble, a cure notice, lawyers. Ugly, private, survivable. That was the plan. That was the whole plan. And then Kevin Sterling, who had never in his life understood what he was actually holding, moved the ceremony up. Which brings us back to the ice. The gala was on a Thursday 4 days before the 15th. Kevin had pulled the signing ceremony forward by 3 weeks and told the trade press it was a signal of confidence. What it actually was, I found out later, was a man who'd heard the word inquiry in a hallway and decided the fastest way out of a burning building was to run at it. He had moved the ceremony directly onto the day the certificate died. I didn't know that yet. Standing by the kitchen doors with a staff badge, all I knew was the date on a memo, and the fact that in 4 days, something was going to happen to my family that I had set in motion and could no longer stop, and that I was going to have to stand in a room and watch it. At 9:15 the quartet stopped, and the lights came up on the stage end of the atrium, and Robert took the podium. He is very good at this. I've never pretended otherwise. He has a way of pausing before the important word that makes 300 people lean forward, and when he talked about the men he flew with, his voice did a thing that was not performance. Whatever else he is, he was 26 years old once, in an aircraft, doing something hard. 40 years ago, he said, my father started this company in a rented hangar with 11 employees and a hand-drafted set of plans. Applause. And I want to tell you the truth about legacy. Legacy is not a name on a building. Legacy is whether the next generation can carry the weight. He looked stage left, so let me introduce the man who architected the cryptographic core of Iron Weave. My son, our Chief Technology Officer, Kevin Sterling. Kevin came out in an unstructured navy blazer with no tie, because that's the costume now, and the rooms stood up. I was 20 feet away holding a tray with 4 dirty glasses on it. He talked for 6 minutes. He used the phrase from the silicon up twice. He said, and I want to be exact because I've since read the transcript in a federal filing. We didn't adapt an existing library. We built it clean. Because when the mission is missile warning, you don't inherit somebody else's assumptions. And then he said the thing that took the floor out from under me. I dedicate this one to my sister, Victoria, who's here tonight. He shaded his eyes against the light and found me by the kitchen, with the tray. Vicky, wave. Vicky's in the Air Force, too, in supply. And I just think it's the coolest thing that we both ended up serving the mission in our own ways. 300 people turned around and applauded a woman holding 4 dirty glasses. And I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because it wasn't clean. For about 1 full second, I was warm. Some 17-year-old still living in the back of my skull sat up and thought, he sees me. That's the part nobody tells you about a family like this. The cruelty doesn't work without the warmth. The warmth is the mechanism. Then the second passed, and I understood what had just happened. He had put my name in a room, in public, attached to supply, on a night when the entire architecture of his lie was resting on a library I wrote. He wasn't being kind, he was reinforcing the version. In front of witnesses, I set the tray down on the service table. And I thought, very calmly, in 4 days, everything you just said in this room becomes a false statement to the government in front of 400 witnesses, and you have no idea. That's when Robert appeared at my elbow and said, "Come to the study." 10 minutes. The study at the Sterling House has a wall of framed things, and it smells like cold fireplace and lemon oil, and it has not changed in 22 years. Robert did not sit down. He stood behind the desk with his fingertips on the blotter. Kevin leaned against the bookcase with a drink. And there was a third man in the room, a lawyer named Prentice with a soft handshake, sitting in the good chair with a document folder on his knees. My mother stood by the door, because she has spent her entire adult life standing by doors. "We're doing an internal cleanup before the award closes," Robert said. "Corporate governance. Boring. But the government looks at it now." He nodded at Prentice, and Prentice slid a document across the desk. "It's a disclaimer of interest. You're not a shareholder. You never were, but you're listed in the family trust as a contingent beneficiary, and it creates a related party question on the filing. Sign it. The question goes away." I read it. It took 2 minutes, which was longer than anyone in that room expected. It was not a disclaimer of interest, or it was, and it was also 4 other things. Paragraph 6 was a non-disparagement clause with a liquidated damages figure of $1.5 million. Paragraph 9 was an acknowledgement that any information I had acquired regarding Sterling Aerospace Technology had been acquired through the family relationship and was subject to a confidentiality obligation running back 15 years. They weren't cleaning up governance. They were trying to get me to sign a piece of paper that would let them argue, later, in front of a judge, that anything I knew about their code, I knew as a daughter and not as a federal official. Somebody had told them the IG was moving, and this was the fire door. "I'm not going to sign this," I said. Robert's face didn't change, which is how I knew we'd arrived. "Victoria, I'm not going to sign it tonight, and I'm not going to sign it Monday, and I'd suggest you ask Mr. Prentice whether paragraph 9 is enforceable against a federal employee. My guess is he already told you it isn't, and you brought it anyway because you thought I'd sign it without reading." Kevin laughed into his glass. "Okay, wow. Your mother," Robert said, "is on the trust distribution." There it was. "Say the rest of it," I said. "There's no rest of it." He straightened the blotter with 2 fingers. "Diane has a distribution. Distributions are discretionary. The trustee reviews conduct that creates legal exposure for the family." He looked up. "I am telling you how a document works," my mother said from the door, Robert. "I'm explaining a mechanism, Diane. Robert, don't." Nobody is doing anything to anyone, and there it was, the crack in the voice, the first one I'd heard in 22 years. He put his palm flat on the desk. "Do you have any idea what is writing on Monday? 4,000 jobs. 40 years. And you are standing in my study litigating a paragraph." And then he said it. I've replayed it 100 times. "You have spent your whole life being the smallest person in every room you walk into. And now that there's finally something worth being part of, you want to be a problem. Because being a problem is the only way anybody's ever going to notice you." The room was very quiet. "You're right that I've been quiet," I said. "You should think hard about why." He didn't hear it. That's the thing. He was standing 11 weeks downstream of a federal referral with his own son's forgery in it, and he heard a stepdaughter having feelings. I walked out. My mother followed me down the hall and caught my wrist at the front door. "He doesn't mean the trust part," she said. "Vicky. He's under so much pressure." And I looked at her, 66 years old, in a beautiful dress, holding my wrist in a house I was never allowed to have a key to, and I asked her the only question I had left. "Mom, In 1994, did Dad go into the aircraft once or twice? Her hand came off my wrist like the wrist was hot. Don't, she said. That's not a no, Victoria. Her eyes were wet and her voice was flat, and those two things have never once gone together in anyone else I've ever met. That was 30 years ago. Some things you don't get to have. I drove home. At 2 in the morning, I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher and my father's keyring in my fist, and I did the thing I had promised myself I would not do, which was hope. The next morning, Robert Sterling called my reserve squadron commander. He did it the way he does everything, which is helpfully. He introduced himself by rank, retired. He said he was calling as a concerned family member. He said he wondered whether anyone had assessed my recent emotional stability, given some erratic behavior and some concerning statements about the family business, and he wanted to make sure the Air Force was taking care of me. My squadron commander is a lieutenant colonel named Ada Whitlock, who has flown 200 hours of medevac and does not have time for anything. She listened to all of it. She thanked him for his concern. And then she called me and said one sentence. A retired 2-star just tried to open a mental health inquiry on you over the phone. I documented the call. Do you want to tell me anything? Or do you want me to just put it in the file? Put it in the file, ma'am. Copy. A pause, Vance. Whatever's coming, the file's clean. I want you to know that. That call went into the record on a Friday. On Monday, it became evidence of witness interference. If you've ever had someone try to make you look crazy for telling the truth, hit like on this one and drop the word documented in the comments. I want the people who kept receipts to find each other. Monday the 15th, the Ironweave award signing. Same atrium cleared and reset, 240 seats. A 12-foot LED wall behind the stage. Front 2 rows for the government. A deputy undersecretary. Program executive officers, a contracting officer, 2 colonels, and 4 general officers, including, at the end of the second row, in service dress with 4 stars on each shoulder, General Arthur Vance, commander of United States Space Command, sitting as the milestone decision authority. I had known he would be there for 9 days. I had known him for a great deal longer than that. I want to explain this cleanly, because in a minute, a lot of people in that room are going to get it wrong on purpose. Arthur Vance is my father's younger brother, my uncle. I last had a real conversation with him when I was 7 years old, at a funeral, in a church basement with folding chairs. When my mother married Robert, the Vance side stopped being invited to things, and then stopped calling. And by the time I was old enough to pick up a phone myself, I had learned the family lesson. Which is that reaching toward people is how you get your hand stepped on. I joined the Air Force under his last name and I never used it. Not once. When his name entered my professional world first as a colonel, then a wing commander, then further I declared the relationship in writing on Form 4453, Item 14, every single year, and I requested screening, and I let 3 assignments go to other people, rather than sit anywhere his signature could touch mine. Remember when I told you to hold on to Item 14? Everyone assumed my conflict disclosure was about Sterling. It was never about Sterling. Sterling was a step family and a step name and no shared blood at all. The box I'd been checking for 11 years, the one that cost me those assignments, had a different name in it. We had exchanged, in the 18 years since I put on a uniform, exactly 2 things: a Christmas card in 2019, and a nod across a hangar at a change of command in 2022. He didn't know I was going to be in that room. I didn't know that in about 40 minutes, he was going to do the single most expensive thing anyone has ever done for me, and that it would look, to everyone watching, like abandonment. At 10:02, the deputy undersecretary made remarks. At 10:11, Kevin took the stage to walk the room through a live demonstration of the Iron Weave key, exchange a real one, against a real government test enclave, because that was the entire point of the ceremony. At 10:14, the LED wall went red, not dramatically. That's the part people never believe. There was no siren, no countdown, no cascading green text. There was a white dialog box, centered, in a plain system font, and it said, Certificate chain invalid attestation authority revoked contact issuing authority. And underneath it, on the signature line, in the same plain font, 400 people saw the handle of the office that had issued the revocation. Ghost Matrix, nobody in that room knew what that string meant. 2 people knew it was a program handle, 1 person knew whose desk it belonged to. Kevin looked at the wall, then he looked at his laptop. Then he did a thing I will remember for the rest of my life. He tapped the spacebar 4 times, fast. The way people do at an airport gate, when the flight information doesn't say what they need it to say. Robert was on the stage in 11 seconds. That's not an exaggeration, there's video. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we do live demonstrations, he said. And he got a laugh. An actual laugh. Because he is that good. 40 years in this business, I promise you. The network always picks the worst possible moment. Give us 5 minutes. The house lights came up. The room did what rooms do, half of it started talking, and the front 2 rows didn't. I watched the front 2 rows. The contracting officer had her laptop open on her knees. The colonel next to her leaned over to look. And a woman I recognized from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, a senior industrial security specialist named Deb Hollins, who has the affect of a woman who has never once been surprised by anything, took out her phone and started typing with 2 thumbs. Backstage, a kid in a Sterling polo was running. And 4 minutes and 40 seconds later, the LED wall came back. Green, key exchange complete. The demo ran, all the way through, and the little progress bar filled, and the word session authenticated came up on a 12-foot screen. The room stood up and clapped. Kevin raised both hands over his head like a man crossing a finish line. Robert came back to the podium and said, "And that is why you hire engineers." And the applause went another 15 seconds. And my mother, 4 rows back, put her hand on her chest and laughed with relief. That was the moment they won. I want to sit in it with you for a second, because it was real. For about 90 seconds. Sterling Aerospace had a $10 billion contract, a room full of believers, and a golden boy with his arms in the air. And I stood at the back of that atrium next to a folding table of untouched pastries, and I felt the floor go cold, because I knew exactly what they had just done. They hadn't fixed anything. You cannot fix a revoked certificate in 4 minutes and 40 seconds. There is no button. What they had done was reach into a development enclave, pull a cached copy of the old certificate, the one that had been valid until 1 minute past midnight that morning, and hand it to a demonstration node that pulls its revocation list once a day at 6 in the evening. So the node said yes. It said yes the way a gate says yes to a badge that was cancelled 4 hours ago and has not reached the guard desk yet. It would have said no by dinner. They only needed it to say yes for 4 minutes. Presenting a revoked credential to a federal information system to obtain access is not a paperwork error. It's a federal crime, and they had just done it in front of 400 witnesses, 2 federal law enforcement officers, and a logging system that timestamps everything to the millisecond. Deb Hollins stood up and walked out the side door with her phone at her ear. Prentice found me by the pastry table. He handed me an envelope and said, quietly, "You should be aware that we've filed a notice regarding your conflict of interest. It would be better for everyone if you weren't in this room." "Mr. Prentice," I said, "do you know what your client's people just did to that enclave?" He didn't. You could see it land, and then you could see him decide he hadn't heard it. At 10:31, the contracting officer walked to the stage steps and asked Robert Sterling for a word. At 10:34, Robert came back to the microphone, and he was gray. He had just been told that the demonstration would need to be rerun under supervision, that the government would be taking custody of the demonstration hardware, and that the signing was postponed pending a technical determination. Postponed, not cancelled, not yet. And Robert Sterling looked out at 240 seats and 4 general officers and 40 years of his father's name on a building, and he made the decision that ended him. He looked for me. "Now before anybody goes anywhere," he said, and he put on the voice, the warm one, the one for fundraisers. "I want to say something about this company. We are not a logo. We are a family, beat. And as it happens, we have a member of that family in this room tonight who works on exactly this kind of system for the Air Force." 400 people turned around. "Victoria, come on up here." I didn't move. "Come on." He gestured, big, generous. "A man including someone. My daughter's a captain. She does supply systems out at," he waved his hand, "she'll tell you. Vicky, honey, get up here and take a look at this thing. Make yourself useful," and there it was. The last one. Wave after wave for 22 years. And the final one was him standing on a stage in front of the United States government, at the exact moment his empire was cracking, asking the woman he'd put by the kitchen door to come save him with her little supply clerk hands. He was going to have it both ways. If I fixed it, Sterling was saved by a Sterling. If I couldn't, then everyone in the room would watch the family's disappointing daughter fail at the grown-ups table, and the story would hold. My mother was looking at me with an expression I had seen approximately 10,000 times. "Just do it, just make it easier." I walked up the center aisle. "Not fast, it's a long aisle." He held out the microphone with one hand and gestured at the laptop on the podium with the other, and as I got close he leaned in off mic and said through his teeth, still smiling, "Don't you dare embarrass me." I took the microphone. I looked at the laptop for exactly as long as it took to be polite, which was about 3 seconds. Then I said, "I can't fix this. I'm the one who stopped signing it." 400 people did not react, because 400 people did not understand. Deb Hollins, standing at the side door with her phone still in her hand, understood. She stopped walking. The contracting officer stood up. Robert laughed. "One syllable. Vicky, ma'am," I said to the contracting officer. "For the record, I'd ask that a government official verify me before I say anything further in this room." The Deputy Undersecretary of Defense stood up in the front row. "Identify yourself, please," she said, and here's where these stories usually turn into a speech. Mine didn't. I've read the transcript. It's 41 words. "Victoria Vance, Technical Director, Special Programs, United States Cyber Command. I hold the attestation authority for this program's root of trust. My office issued the revocation at midnight. The handle on your screen is my office." The room made a sound, not a gasp. It's more of a shift, 400 people redistributing their weight at once. Robert had not moved. His hand was still out, holding air where the microphone had been. "That's not," he said. "She works in supply." "No, sir," I said. "You work in supply. That's a different thing." And I'd let it go. "Except you told a federal contracting officer 4 minutes ago that a member of your family could repair a certificate chain, and she wrote that down." Kevin had gone the color of the tablecloth. He was still holding his presentation clicker, and he was holding it in both hands, and he was doing a thing with his thumb, where he kept pressing the button that didn't do anything anymore. And then Robert Sterling did the only thing he had left, which is what men like him always do, which is turn the room. He grabbed the microphone off the podium. "This is a vendetta," he said, and his voice was loud enough to feed back. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone in this room to understand what's happening here. That woman is my stepdaughter. She has resented this family for 20 years. He swung his arm out toward the second row and pointed with 2 fingers, the way you point at a target. And the officer sitting right there, General Vance, is her blood relative. Her uncle. He is the decision authority on this award. This is not a security finding. This is a family ambush, and it is going to be on the front page of every paper in this country tomorrow morning. That genuinely was a very good move. It was the smartest thing he did all day, and for seconds it worked. I watched it work. I watched 3 colonels in the front row look at each other. Because the appearance of impropriety is a phrase that ends careers. And if he could make this look like a family running a hit through a 4-star, the finding would drown in process for 2 years, and the company would survive it. General Arthur Vance stood up. He is 71 years old and built like a filing cabinet. And he took a long moment to get his service cap in his hand. And then he spoke without a microphone. And everybody heard him anyway. "That's correct," he said. "Victoria Vance is my brother's daughter. My brother was Master Sergeant Daniel Vance. He died in 1994. Robert's chest was going up and down. "I've had no contact with her since she was a child," Arthur said. "That relationship is declared on her annual disclosure and has been for 11 years, along with her requested screening, which I would encourage the department's counsel to pull. Since the general has invited scrutiny." He turned toward the deputy undersecretary. "Ma'am, effective now, I recuse myself from the milestone decision on this program. I'll submit it in writing within the hour. I'd ask that the deputy decision authority be seated." And he put on his cap, and he walked out of the room. He did not look at me. Not once the entire way up that aisle. And I want you to understand what it cost him and what it cost me, because a lot of people watched that and thought a 4-star had just abandoned his niece in front of 400 people. That is exactly what it looked like. It was the opposite. If he'd said one warm word, if he'd so much as met my eyes, Robert's accusation becomes true enough to matter, and 11 weeks of work turns into a headline about a family feud. By walking out cold, he took himself out of the story entirely. He gave up the right to be my uncle so that the finding could stand on its own. And Robert Sterling, standing at that podium with his microphone in his hand, watching a 4-star general walk out of his award ceremony, believed for 1 entire minute that he had just won. The Deputy Undersecretary of Defense did not sit down. "General Sterling," she said, "the finding on this program didn't originate at Space Command. It came out of the Department of Defense Inspector General and D. CSA. It was sustained 9 days ago by a senior official with no relationship to anyone in your family, and General Vance never saw it, because Ms. Vance recused herself from the source selection on this contract before your company submitted a bid." She let that sit for a second. "You've just accused a federal official of a conspiracy on the record, in a room with 2 special agents in it. I'd stop talking and call your counsel." Prentice was already moving down the side aisle, and the look on his face was the look of a man doing arithmetic on his own license. Deb Hollins came up the center aisle instead. She has a badge she wears on a chain, and she never once raised her voice. "Mr. Kevin Sterling," she said, "I need the demonstration laptop and the hardware token on your person, and I need you to not power anything down. Do you understand me?" Kevin looked at his father. "That's the image the trade press ran, from somebody's phone, and it's the one I still think about. 34 years old, holding a clicker in one hand and a laptop in the other, looking at his dad the exact way a 9-year-old looks at a parent when a window's broken. 'Dad,' he said, and Robert Sterling, I'll give him this, and it's the only thing I'll give him, took 1 step in front of his son. 'Whatever this is,' he said to Hollins, 'it comes to me.' I signed the accreditation package. I signed the ceremony attestation. Whatever's wrong in it is on my signature, not his." Hollins looked at me. I'd been holding this for 6 weeks. You have to understand I could have let him take it. That was an available door. He'd have gone down for it. Absolutely and permanently. Exactly the way he deserved to for 22 years of everything else. And Kevin would have walked. And I would have gotten a version of what I'd wanted since I was 17. Robert Sterling. Ruined. I didn't want it anymore. That's not a moral position. I'd just seen the paperwork, and once you've seen the paperwork, you can't unsee what it actually says. Robert, I said, you didn't sign it, he turned. The key ceremony package was signed with your credential at 11:51 at night on the 22nd of March, I said. From a hotel network in Aspen, Colorado. His mouth opened. You were in Ramstein, I said. You gave a keynote. There are photographs of you on a stage 7 time zones away, and I've had them for 6 weeks, and they are the reason you are not the one being asked for a laptop right now. He did not look at Kevin. He would not. He stood there with his back to his own son and stared at me, and I watched a man do the fastest and most expensive piece of thinking of his life. Because he already knew. That's what I understood, standing 4 feet from him. Some part of Robert Sterling had known for years, in the way you know a sound in your house at night, and decide it's the pipes. He had built a career around a boy who couldn't do the work, and he had spent 20 years making sure no one was ever positioned to check, including him. Kev, he said without turning around, tell her. Nothing. Tell her you were in Aspen and you logged in to help me, and that's all it was. His voice had gone somewhere. I'd never heard it go. Kevin, tell her. And Kevin Sterling, Chief Technology Officer, architect of nothing, said the only true sentence I have ever heard him say. You told me to make it work. The room heard it. The room was silent, and the microphone was still live on the podium 8 feet away, and it picked it up, and that recording is in a federal filing now. Here's what happened, in the order it happened, because I know that's what you're here for. The award was rescinded 11 days later, not postponed. Rescinded, on the grounds that the technical volume contained a material misrepresentation regarding the origin of the cryptographic core and the provenance of key material. The Air Force referred Sterling Aerospace for suspension and proposed debarment from federal contracting. If you don't know what that means, a defense company that can't hold a federal contract isn't a company. It's a building. Kevin was indicted 8 months later. Wire fraud, false statements, and unauthorized access to a protected computer for the 4 minutes and 48 seconds when a Sterling engineer, at his direction, pushed a revoked certificate into a federal test enclave to make a green bar fill up in front of a room. He pleaded to 2 counts. He is not in prison. He got 30 months of probation. Restitution he will be paying into his 60s. And a federal felony conviction that means he will never again hold a clearance, a directorship, or a job in the industry his grandfather built. Robert wasn't charged. The evidence didn't support it, and I said so, in writing, twice, when it would have been very easy not to. What happened to Robert was worse. The Inspector General's report named him. Not for forgery, for a sustained failure of executive oversight constituting willful blindness. 68 pages, publicly releasable, with his name in it 41 times. The board removed him as executive chairman. His 2 seats on defense advisory panels evaporated in a week. The university that had been going to name a fellowship after him sent a letter that used the phrase "at this time." And in the middle of all of it, his lawyers made one more mistake, which is the part I did not plan and could not have planned. To rebut the willful blindness finding, they filed his entire service record as character evidence. 29 years of it. Every evaluation, every commendation, every award package, unredacted, into the administrative record. Including the original recommendation for the Airman's Medal, drafted in May of 1994 by the 2 surviving crew members of an aircraft that burned in a hangar in Oklahoma. Both statements say the same thing. The pilot got clear on his own. A 26-year-old captain named Robert Sterling pulled one man out. And then the crew chief, Master Sergeant Daniel Vance, who had already gotten himself out, went back a second time for the third man and got him to the door and did not come out after him. The recommendation named my father first. At wing level that summer, somebody made a decision. A posthumous enlisted award package took 18 months and 3 levels of review. A living officer took 6 weeks and made the base look good in a bad news cycle. So the citation got rewritten in the passive voice. The aircraft commander returned to the fuselage, and my father got a line in the narrative and a folded flag, and Robert Sterling got a medal, and a photograph, and a story, and eventually a widow. I don't think he forged it. I've read every page, and I don't believe he wrote a word of it. He just accepted it. He was 26, and someone handed him a version of a night he barely survived, and it was better than the truth, and he took it. And then he hung it on a wall in a study, and he built a house around that wall, and he married the dead man's wife, and he put the dead man's daughter over the garage. He didn't steal from me first, he stole from my father first. I was just the second draft. 14 months later, the Air Force Board for Correction of Military Records amended a citation from 1994. It's a plain document. It corrects the narrative to reflect that the second entry into the fuselage was made by Master Sergeant Daniel Vance, and it approves a posthumous award, 31 years late, to a man who has been dead longer than I was alive when I lost him. My uncle called me the day it cleared, first phone call in 18 years. He said 11 words, "It's done. There's a diner on Route 9. I'm buying breakfast." He'd had those crew statements in a shoebox since 1996. He'd petitioned the board twice, in 2004 and in 2011, and been denied both times for insufficient evidence, because the only copy of the original recommendation was buried in the personnel file of a man who would never authorize its release. Robert's lawyers filed it themselves, to prove he was a good man. At the diner, my uncle slid the amended citation across a laminated table in a plastic sleeve, and neither of us said anything for a while. And then he said, "I should have called you when you were 15. "I should have called you when I was 30, I said. "Yeah," he turned his coffee cup around. "Well, we're both cowards about the same things. It's genetic, that's the whole reunion. 2 people who lost 18 years to a house that neither of them lived in. We have breakfast now, about once a month. It is not a movie ending. It's better than nothing, and it is not what I would have had." Marisol Reyes sat through 9 hours of deposition while their lawyers put her mother's dialysis billing into an exhibit binder, and she did not flinch once. She got the agreement voided, her name off the non-rehirable list, and a job offer from the company that fired her, which she turned down. She works in my directorate now. She is going to be extremely difficult to manage, and I am looking forward to it. Sterling Aerospace was sold in pieces. The propulsion division went to a competitor and kept its people. 2,200 jobs survived. Roughly 900 didn't. And I have thought about those 900 a great deal, and I don't have a clean answer for you. There isn't one. 62 compromised modules were going into missile warning authentication. I would make the same call again. It cost people who never did anything to me, and both of those things are true at once, and anyone who tells you a story like this with that part is selling you something. My mother called 11 times in the first month. I answered on the 12th. She wanted to talk about how hard it had been for her. She wanted me to know she'd always been proud. She said the word family 9 times in about 4 minutes, and every single time she used it, she meant don't. So I said the thing I'd rehearsed in the car. "Mom, I'm not going to be the person you talk to about him. I'm not going to be the person who tells you it wasn't that bad. If you want to see me, there's a diner on Route 9, and I'm there the first Saturday of the month at 8. And you're welcome, and I'll pay. And if you bring him, I'll leave. She's come twice in 2 years. She sat across from me both times, and talked about her garden and asked nothing about my job. And I let her. Because at 68 you don't get remade. And because I have finally stopped waiting for a woman to become somebody she has never once been. That's the boundary. It's not a reconciliation. It's a table and a time and a rule. If you ever had a room in your own family's house where you were tolerated instead of wanted, put the word garage in the comments. I read them, all of them. Robert wrote me a letter last spring. 4 pages, handwritten. I read the first page, which was about how the investigation had been very hard on his health. And I put it in a drawer, and it's still there. And I have not been curious enough to finish it. I did see him once. Grocery store. Produce aisle. 74 years old. Wearing a windbreaker. Standing in front of the bagged salads. He didn't see me, and there was no music in it and no satisfaction in it and no ice in my stomach. He was just an old man deciding between 2 kinds of lettuce in a town where everyone knows exactly what happened. I turned around and went out the other way, and I bought groceries somewhere else. And that was the entire event. Here's what I actually want you to take, and it isn't stay quiet and let your work speak. My work didn't speak for 22 years. Work doesn't speak. Work sits there while people who benefit from your silence explain you to a room. What ended, it wasn't a secret identity. There's no call sign in the world that makes a family see you. It was a serial number that didn't match. A woman named Marisol who ran the manifest 4 times. A squadron commander who documented a phone call. 406 pages. And a signature I declined to give. That's all a reckoning ever is. It's paperwork and a witness, and the moment you stop making it easier for everybody. The amended citation hangs in my hallway. It's the only thing on that wall. There's no metal with it. The metal is in a box in a drawer, because the metal was never the point. And somewhere in a government archive, there's a library I wrote 10 years ago, with a cipher table ordered backwards by year and a lattice seed set to 411-984, sitting there like a seam in a coat, waiting for the one person in the world who'd recognize the stitching. I put my father's name in that code before anyone would let me say it out loud. Turns out that was enough.